Well, welcome everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining our virtual community meeting on the Central Business District Renewal and Expansion. We have a great turnout, as I mentioned. I think we're most definitely breaking records with attendance on our meetings and events in this remote environment. It definitely makes it easy to participate, eliminates all that travel time and some other challenges, I think. But it is great to see as well the amount of engagement on these important topics. And so I appreciate your attendance and your interest in learning more about what we're doing and why we're doing the renewal and expansion of the Central Business District. So before we roll into the program, I'd like to turn it over to Liz Soltero with Ward 1. She's with Councilmember Lane Santa Cruz's office, and she would like to share a welcome and some opening remarks. So Liz, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Barbara, and thank you to the team for organizing the meetings. And just wanted to share on behalf of Councilmember Santa Cruz, who's unable to join us today, but thank you to Councilmember Santa Cruz and Mayor Romero for asking for these community meetings, and also again, thank you for your team to organizing, and thank you to all the individuals that are joining us here today. I just wanted to share a brief statement on behalf of the council member and then turn it back over to y'all in the community to have dialogue. While it is critically important that we target resources towards communities that have suffered from neglect and disinvestment from the city, we must also acknowledge that with new investment comes concerns about commercial and residential displacement. The neighborhoods surrounding the proposed expansion areas of the Central Business District need to be recognized as stakeholders in the decision-making process. At the very minimum, they need to be at the table so they can take full advantage of the new opportunities created by this expansion. We need to hear their concerns and comments, acknowledging that they are the experts in their own experience, and then we need to address those concerns. The COVID-19 crisis has impacted our community in many ways, including limiting access in what was already a tight housing market and dramatically impacting the livelihoods of our small business owners. We need to ensure that the expansion of the Central Business District provides ample benefits for those already invested in our community, and that it does not primarily benefit large commercial developers and out-of-state investors. By focusing on community, focusing on their needs, and developing leadership among the residents to advocate for their own needs, we stand a much better chance of navigating the economic crisis we are in and planning for a more equitable future. So just with those words, really thank you all for creating the time and the environment so that we can come together and discuss. Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you. It's fantastic. And I appreciate the mayor and Councilmember Santa Cruz's leadership in this effort. And of course, past and current council members who've been part of the Central Business District and its growth and development and all that goes with that. So again, thank you. And I think we're going to have a great meeting. What I want to do first is introduce some key, or just let you know in the room who some key staff members are as well that are helping me today. This certainly isn't a solo act. It's taken a team of people, and so I appreciate their efforts throughout really the past many months, as well as preparing for today. And so key people part of the process here to answer technical questions as well. I have Kevin Burke, Deputy Director of Economic Initiatives. I have Mike Chakowski, Project Manager for Economic Initiatives. Roy Lusk, Principal Assistant City Attorney. Ann Chineka, Deputy Director, Housing and Community Development. Corin Manning, Planning Administrator for Planning and Development Services. Allison Miller, Lead Planner with Housing and Community Development. Nick Ross, Lead Planner with Planning and Development Services. Lauren Seamus, Planner with the Housing and Community Development Department. And Teresa Noon, Community Outreach Program Manager with Pima Community College, who helps us in our Thriving the O5 project. So again, appreciate the work of all of the team members and everything that they do to help move this forward. And again, make sure that we're following all of the requirements. As you'll see when we talk about this afternoon, what it takes to put this district together, it is somewhat complicated and there is a process, but I think it's an important one. And so we'll talk about that. And I will share my screen so that I can walk you through some slides. So I will prepare that now. Oops. Yep. Does that look like you can see it? And I will make it larger. All right. So I've said who I may not have said who I was, but I am Barbara Coffey, Director of Economic Initiatives for the City of Tucson. I think this is my third or fourth webinar today, so you'd think I'd know my name by now. So we're getting there. And we'll continue with our agenda, but you see that we've taken care of some important introductions and welcoming remarks, and we'll talk about the definitions and legal requirements of the Central Business District creation. We'll talk about how we use that Central Business District, what it means for downtown Tucson and the city at large, and the process for the renewal and expansion of the Central Business District. And then we'll take some questions from you after the formal presentation. So if you'll make note of those, you're welcome to add your questions as well in the chat box. I've got a team of people helping watch for those questions and asking them to help respond as well. And then we can answer all the questions at the end in an open dialogue after the formal remarks. So I start by just sharing that our Office of Economic Initiatives is involved in a lot of things, but we're very focused on a few core key program elements. I like to say that we run a comprehensive economic development strategy for the city, a comprehensive program that includes things like business retention, expansion, business attraction. It includes small business and entrepreneurial development, and it includes things like revitalization and redevelopment efforts, along with other key programs that we're responsible for, like our economic and workforce development grants and annexation programs. We this year have just recently launched our website. Thank goodness we did in February, because when COVID hit, we were very happy to have connecttucson.com as a place for resources. So I invite you to always look there for other information. And that is the place that we will post a link to the recording of this meeting as well, so that you can share with others and take a look at it and view it at your own pleasure as well. So again, contact information for us, and I'm happy to put our emails in the chat box as well. Kevin might be able to help me do that in case you need to reach back out to us with any questions following this meeting. So let's dive in and talk about the definitions and legal requirements of the Central Business District. And this is a program that is governed by state statutes. So you can see here that I went ahead and put the words on the screen so that you would be able to see the actual statutes that govern the creation of a Central Business District. It does mean it's a single and contiguous geographical area that's designated by resolution of the local governing body. The Central Business District may not be more than 2.5% of the total land area of the city, and the area may not be more than twice as long as it is wide. And so that comes into play when we think about the configuration of the district. And again, especially our expansion area, as some of those new requirements came into play after our original district was created. So while it looks like, if you see the map on your screen, I want to point out as well that that is, and I hope our little pictures aren't covering it up, but our area that is outlined in green is our current and existing, what I would call our existing Central Business District, and the area that is shadowed and shaded in blue shows the areas that we want to continue to look at for expansion. So that proposed expansion area that goes beyond the green boundary includes what we are proposing for council's consideration. And that does take us to that almost 2.5%. I think it's about 2.4%, 2.5% of the total city planning area. So again, we're constrained by how big it can be by state statute. The Central Business District is an area that the city has determined meets the definition of a slum area. Slum and blight is a terms you'll hear quite frequently related to the creation of this district, where sound municipal growth is substantially arrested. So that's its definition in the statute. And I'll talk a little bit more about what that means and how we define that, and how we look at the area in terms of certifying that it meets that definition. On April 17th of 2012, that was the date Mayor and Council first adopted Tucson Central Business District by resolution. So we have had the district in place for a number of years. So here's more about this definition of slum area. It is an area where we find a predominance of buildings or improvements, whether residential or non-residential, where the public health, safety, or welfare is threatened because of any of these following things. Dilapidated, deteriorated structures, aging or obsolescent buildings or improvements. They may be buildings and areas with inadequate provision for ventilation, light, air, sanitation, or open spaces. They may be areas of overcrowding and the existence of conditions that endanger life or property by fire and other causes. So when we are looking at an area that forms the central business district, it needs to have a predominance of this kind of deterioration, dilapidation inside of it, right? So we're looking for physical evidence of this to be in existence. In particular, that's why photos like the one you see here are important, because it's very clear visual evidence of an area, in particular the buildings in that area or the structures in that area that are exhibiting these conditions. So yeah, okay. So let's talk about the purpose now of the Central Business District. So the statutes grant the city of Tucson the authority to abate property tax for up to 8 years if a property is located within a designated central business district and if it meets other specific criteria. So what I like to say is it's the central business district, the purpose of us having a designation of a district is so that we can go to work in that area, right? It means if there are conditions of blight or slum and blight, as we just talked about, then we want to rectify that. We want to do all that we can to keep all areas of the city, those that are aging and those that are the newer areas of city, we want to keep them all coming up and improving and being enhanced at the same time and not being left to fall further into decline. So the reason that we would be interested in creating a central business district is to attack that very issue. And then to use the tools that are available to us, like this 8-year property tax abatement, which we'll talk a little bit about. That is the one tool right now by state statute that does allow us a little more latitude to help us attract reinvestment into that area so that we can change that cycle of deterioration. So this tool is commonly referred to as the government property lease excise tax. And we call it the GPLET here. You'll hear others maybe say GPLET, but that sounds too much like a turkey dinner. So I think we say GPLET here in Tucson. It does allow the city to facilitate development and redevelopment of real property in the central business district area by providing a financial incentive to projects that would not be economically feasible, but for the value realized through that property tax abatement. So I like to point that out too, that when we think about incentives or helping attract investment to an area, helping development to occur, we're doing so because we think that it wouldn't happen on its own, or that it wouldn't happen as soon as it might be beneficial, right? So we know that if we are creating jobs and attracting investment and creating opportunity for access and pathways to wealth, then that helps everyone. So I want you to keep that in mind as we continue to talk about the purpose for this. And it's getting skip happy, so there we go. So then here's how this will work. We're looking at council's consideration for this expansion and renewal of the Central Business District on their meeting at September 9th. We do anticipate further discussions around our GPLET policies and application procedures. We have already made a lot of changes and modifications to how we do that. So we'll talk about that a little bit later as well. Note that also other government entities like Rio Nuevo or other public agencies have the ability to enter into GPLET agreements. And I will also note that a GPLET can happen anywhere in the city. It's just that our central business district allows us that unique ability to do an 8-year property tax abatement. There is state statutes around a government property lease excise tax program, the GPLET, for something to occur citywide, and there is an associated lease payment that is spelled out in state statute for that purpose. Again, it's the 8-year abatement in the central business district that allows us to encourage that activity to happen in a targeted area like our central business district area. So the other point I want you to be aware of is that use of those tools and incentives in the central business district are at the absolute discretion of mayor and council. So they have the authority to look at a project, and if a project is not desirable by any means, and certainly, you know, not one that they would want to go forward with, then they do not have to approve the use of tools and incentives like the GPLET in the central business district. So I wanted you to be aware that it is a discretionary incentive. It is not a by right incentive for a development project coming into the area. So to date, just to give you an idea of the impact of where we've been with the use of the GPLET in our central business district and what it has helped us achieve, we have entered into 25 different agreements. We have a very cool storyboard map that I'll flip to right now. So let me do that. I'm going to switch what we're looking at and take you to here. So you should be able to see this property tax abatement in Tucson Central Business District now. Okay, I'm taking a yes. I'm looking at Liz right now, actually, as my person. Can you see the screen? Okay, yep. Okay.
Barbara, I still see the PowerPoint.
You still see the PowerPoint? Okay. Oh, good point. Let me get a new share up. Oh, I see what I got to do. Now this might work. How's that look? Okay, so we have a new image. So I wanted to just skip right over here because this is a great place, and it's housed on our connecttucson.com website, a place to look at where our GPLETs have taken place. So for example, you'll see here the Herbert on 12th Street is an example of a project that took advantage and was built using the GPLET incentive. You can see we list revenue impacts and the value of the GPLET incentive, and note that we always have more economic impact and benefit to the city than we do a value of the incentive. So that's an important point. The Cadence, built in 2014 on East Congress Street, you probably know it well, is also an example of a project that was built in our central business district by virtue of using the GPLET tool. Mr. Car Wash headquarters in 2015, that's another one. So I'm going to skip through some of these, but again, I think you'll recognize many of them. So again, the BP Annex on East Congress. Brother John's Barbecue is another great example. That's in our Thrive in the 05 area on Stone Avenue. The AC Hotel by Marriott. This was one of the first new hotels in downtown in a very long time. Very exciting project back in 2017 when it was completed. So again, something you've probably seen. The Trinity project is a more recent one, a new office environment right there on the streetcar line. The Tucson Hotel, and they just celebrated their opening just about a month ago. So again, a great new opportunity for them to re-envision a former Motel 6. We like seeing the new boutique brand come into play and offer opportunities. So I wanted to point that out as a place that we are capturing some of the more detailed information on these projects. So I'll go back and kind of pick up where we left off. So that's the idea. We're looking for projects that help bring economic impact and benefit to the city. That's the primary focus when we use tools inside the created, informed central business district. So some questions that often come up, are we required to review and renew? And the answer is yes. In order to move forward By state statute, we are required to renew our central business district if we choose to do so by October 1 of this year. We can either renew, modify, or terminate the designation. Mayor and council have previously provided direction to expand the boundary when we talked early last year about starting down this process, knowing that we had a renewal date coming up. We had several meetings with the then mayor and council about going through the process to certify the district. And I'll talk more about that certification process as well in a moment. So we've talked about how it's been a useful tool, the GPLET. We've talked about how we still have work to do because we have still an area of blighted conditions that need to be impacted, underutilized and vacant lots and dormant properties and properties with issues. And so it is important for us to take a look at anything we can to help really reverse that deterioration and occurrence of dilapidation in the area. So what I want to do next is take you through this, and then we'll show the map one more time. When we began last fall of proceeding down the path of resurveying, as I like to call it, the area to make sure that it met state statute requirements of that slum and blight slum condition, as I mentioned earlier, we actually did field work, and I call it windshield survey. We sent a crew of people, and thanks to our housing and community development partners, they really had boots on the ground helping us. And we went out and we took photos and we documented, and photos are great because they tell the story. And we created a certification of the district and findings of conditions in the central business district for that purpose. We looked at, if you think about the proposed expanded, the complete proposed expanded central business district area that I showed you is a total of 4,619 parcels. This gives you an idea of the age. The median year is around 1960. So again, you can see that that there is, a preponderance of aging structures, and that 63% of those were built before 1978. And again, similarly with the commercial parcels as well. And I want to focus you in on the commercial activity because it is truly the commercial areas that we're interested in. So when we look at a central business district, we're really thinking in terms of economic development, we're focused on the commercial aspects of that area. I go back to one of the first few slides that I showed you when thinking about the requirement by statute for the width and the length of the district. That's the only reason we had to show where there are some residential properties that appear to be inside the district. It is not because we want to transition those properties in any way. It's because we were required for the geographical shape of the district to look a certain way. So let's talk about land uses in the proposed central business district. And to that point, it shows you that in the more than 3,600 acres of the core central business district area, that the land use area is predominantly commercial, almost 21%, followed by the industrial uses of almost 20% there. And so you can see, let me see if you're able to follow. So the two tallest dark blue images here in the graph are the commercial and industrial properties in the 3,600 acres. And the dark green are the tax exempt properties, and then the government, and this rusty color is the government. So again, tax exempt or government buildings and structures, or properties. So you can tell from the far left, single family and multifamily, and then mobile homes, that residential is really a smaller part of the picture. And again, as I said, just from a policy perspective and an economic development perspective, it is really about the commercial orientation that we are focused on when we're thinking about attracting development and job growth. So having code violations and crime issues in these areas also contribute to its conditions and contribute to the state statute requirement of a place where we could then go to work and utilize programs like the GPLET for turning things around. So we look at crime data in that perspective. And it is interesting to note that even though the area itself, the proposed area, is just 2.5% of the city's total land area, and yet it's part 1 and 2 crime data from January 2013 to February 2020, when we gathered this data, shows that the part 1 and 2 crimes account for almost 11% of the city totals for these crimes. So it's something to think about, and notable that 34% of the commercialized sex crimes occur in this area as well. So just again, these are just the facts and the conditions that help us determine, again, rationale for why we would continue to want to change some of this, to transform the path that we're on as it relates to the Central Business District area. So there's the chart for code violations, and you can see greater than 12, almost 13% then on the building safety, and then followed by fire code violations, vacant structure, zoning, and so on. And so so we gather that data as a representation based on a comparison for what's happening in the district versus the entire city, to show that there is a high frequency of incidences in those cases, contributing to why we would want to continue to look at anything we could do to turn that around. So what's the process for renewal and expansion going forward? So as I said before, last year, May, we had noted here on the slide, in May of 2019, we had direction to continue to look at the expansion of the area, and that's when we began in the latter part of last year to start doing our windshield survey and gathering our data to establish the findings of conditions. We have created that report. It is on our website, so there'll be a link to that there as well, and we'll make sure that if you haven't seen that you will have a link to it following the meeting. And then on August 12th, that's today, we're having our first community meeting, and we will have another meeting on Saturday. So if those of you who would either like to join in again or share with others to join us, we will meet again on the 15th. And I believe I'm going to have Kevin put the date and time in the chat box as well, if you do that for me, Kevin. It's midday. September 9th then would be our date for council consideration of the resolution, which would reauthorize and approve the expansion of the Central Business District if they choose to do so. So with that, let's see if I have anything else right now. I think that I'm going to stop sharing for a moment and take a look at questions. And Kevin, I might ask if you would unmute as well, and then give me an update on kind of how things are going in the chat room. I'm going to scroll through, and certainly if you would like to, I'm going to look at the written ones first, and then I'll call for those verbally that have questions. Kevin, you can give me a brief update. How are we doing?
Okay. I think we're all caught up in the chat room. I've been waiting for some more questions to come through. So I haven't seen any in the last few minutes, but I believe that those have been asked in the chat box to date have been answered. Okay. And some of the information that you mentioned a minute ago, I will put in there, as well as the link to the report, the findings of conditions in the Central Business District report.
Okay. So I see there is a question from Corky about, is there a plan to include the western part of Sunshine Mile to the Central Business District? And I know this has been a topic. We've also talked with Ward 6 about this very point as well. There had been a lot of conversation about the length and width of the district. So again, I think Kevin's response there, the proposed expansion of the Central Business does not include that portion of the western portion of the Sunshine Mile, but primarily due to those length and width requirements. A very technical not even I could sit at my desk with a ruler and figure it out. I had to make sure the city attorneys could take a look at it with their expert eyes, because they need to make sure that they can fully defend that description that we create and the boundaries that we set. And so so it was just mostly due to that we couldn't take that further down the street. Let's see, yes, I want to share the map again. So let's get to that. Let's go to the map. I'm gonna do that. All right. And I should be able to get to the next. Okay, so now tell me, I think you're seeing the map. So I'm gonna have it up here. It's hard to get it all on one screen. I think, note it, you do on Zoom at the top, well, if you're on a laptop at the top, it may be a different place on an iPad, but you have the ability to zoom in as well on your own. There are options at the top for zooming in. But you can see, so I'll scroll down. You can see that the red box is the city of South Tucson, you know, that's carved out there. We don't have authority over that area. However, it does create a boundary. So you can see that our expansion area takes us down south almost to toward, is this, did I get the right map? Nope, this is the current. No, yes, this is it. Okay, I'm just making sure. Kevin, you're on there to tell me if I'm messing up. But all right, so we get all the way almost to the bridges. I think the JTED site is included. So that's a key identifier. And then as we go back north, you can see that some of the expanded area creeps up I-10, creeps up into the 05 area, and includes, you know, a few more key corridors. And you can also get a sense of how they do try to follow the commercial corridors, okay? So this is really not about trying to take neighborhoods. This is about commercial nodes. So, but because of statute requirements, that dictates that the way it looks. So I go back to that just as a comment. Let's see, going back to let's take a look at any other questions that are coming through. So let's see, actually, let's see how I can find, here we go. All right, so the other questions that I'm seeing, and it looks like Kevin has also mentioned that yes, in the findings report, you can also view the PDF and zoom in at your pleasure. Did I do that? I must have done that. I don't know why I did that. Okay. But what is the process for refuting the conditions report regarding dilapidated, deteriorated, aging, or obsolescent buildings or improvements, and the existence of conditions that endanger? So the process for refuting, this may be where I call on my city attorney team member, if Roy is in the house. And Kevin, I didn't look at the entire participant list to see if Roy is present, but if he is, show yourself. Okay.
Roy is here, yeah.
Oh, great. So Roy, would you help with Ken's question here about a process for refuting the conditions report? What does that look like?
So the key to understanding what the report is it's just basically a description of some of the things that are happening in these areas. Under state law, it is up to the mayor and council to make a finding that any particular area is subject to what the state law definition is of slum and blight, as Barbara has already alluded to. That finding is made by mayor and council. It's entirely up to them whether they accept the report or they reject the report or ask for modification. In terms of refuting it, it's not, you're more than welcome to reach out to your local council member. or be present at the public hearing for the mayor and council as a whole. But again, it's up to them to decide whether to accept the report or reject it.
So thank you, Roy. And I will add to that for everyone's benefit to realize that we're looking at a preponderance, if you recall, a preponderance of conditions. It does not mean by any stretch of the imagination, it does not mean that every property is blighted or that every property meets the slum definition. We know that not to be true. There are some fantastic and most beautiful places in our central business district, in and around downtown. So that's not what it means. What it means is that there are a presence of those conditions, though, in this greater district that you see in front of you on the map, and that's important enough to continue to tackle and change and try to transform, right? The aging and deterioration, those conditions that do exist. So I just want to point that out. That does not mean that your property is that. So if that's even a question. But let's look at a couple of other things here. The question from Ron, what is the vacant structure violation? Oh, that was on my code violation report. So that's.
And Barbara, I just responded to that in the chat box, but essentially that category of violations, it includes a number of things. And so the specifics that I cited would be things like graffiti or unsecured windows and doors. If you essentially have a vacant property and you've left it unattended and it becomes an attractive nuisance or a magnet for crime, it's going to fall into that category.
Excellent. That was a great response. So, okay. And then I'm reading just real quickly to make sure.
Barbara, there was a question a little bit further up in the chat that we didn't get to, I believe, from Josefina.
Okay.
She was asking if you would address the gentrification question.
Okay. And I'm going to, oh, here it is. How do you plan to address gentrification? So that is a very complex issue, right? It's not something that we could probably even solve in this discussion, but how we plan to address it. In some of my comments, I shared first and foremost about the fact that that when we use incentives, and they are discretionary. So mayor and council have the ability to utilize an incentive or not to attract a development or project. Now, doesn't mean that so let's just say absent any incentives, if a project or development opportunity comes along and it has its ability with the current city code and zoning ordinances in place to do what it wants to do, then it typically goes forward and does that. When an incentive is being requested and we are reviewing a project for that, then again, we have the opportunity to go forward or not go forward, right? So it can be approved by council or not approved, in which case then the project decides what it would do. Does it, can it move forward without an incentive? Maybe it can, and maybe it can't. And ideally, the projects that we like to see are ones that really do need to be assisted, but only because they are deemed beneficial and a benefit to the city. Okay, so to back to the question of how that changes a community or a neighborhood in the case of gentrification, it is not our purpose to displace any kind of activity or residence or that is not the kind of transformation that we're looking at. But again, I go back to the economic development reason, but the opportunity to look at an improvement where an otherwise, again, dilapidated, deteriorated, or vacant structure or business or building is there, and we can turn it into and enliven it into something that is more contributing and that it enhances our overall quality of life. That's what we're looking for. So, I can't tell you that I'm an expert on gentrification, but what I can tell you is that mayor and council are looking at other opportunities to explore. And I want to give you so I'm looking at my notes here. So, you know, we have engaged with our partners in housing and community development, and even the soon-to-be Commission on Equitable Housing and Development, to be a participant in a positive discussion regarding future development in the city. And so we would be reviewing those things through that lens, and you would have further opportunity to express and engage in those conversations through our housing and community development efforts. I hope that helps answer, and maybe maybe in the chat we'll see if we get some comments to that effect. Let's see, and then I'm going to go. You're still seeing the map, correct? I just want to be sure. Okay, so I'm going to look back at the chat. Kevin, how did that go? And are there some other key questions that we should get to? I'm looking at, from Joe, do we know if the new Commission on Equitable Housing and Development will have a role in recommending or approving these economic incentives? Not necessarily on our incentive side. We actually, again, we work with a third party economic analysis. Here I am just losing my words now. We do a third-party economic analysis to establish the benefit of a project when we do a GPLET. We do some internal review with our management team and our attorneys, and then we take that information to mayor and council. So the process for our incentives is more in that line. But that doesn't mean, obviously there's overlap, right? And it doesn't mean that we're operating in a vacuum. So in essence, there would be some partnership for sure with housing and community development and the work that the commission is doing. There's also, it looks like Kevin's answered a couple things from Corky.
There was one question from Ernesto that I hadn't had an opportunity to address, but maybe we could speak to that one.
Okay.
The question, and I'm not now looking at it again, but I think the question was whether or not we're able to track job creation in the central business district.
It does say, Ernesto's question is, can you measure the number of city residents who have gained employment in the central business district?
Yeah, and so what I would say, Barbara, maybe you would add on to this, it's really tough to track job creation in a specific boundary that the city has created, because usually those statistics are tracked you know, according to census block group data. And obviously you've seen the boundaries of the existing and the proposed central business district. It crosses over those boundaries pretty readily. And so it's really difficult to cite a number that you would say specifically is within the central business district.
It looks like there was a question about housing. So in the residential arena, Corky asked, GPLET has been used to subsidize good quality new housing at high rents. Has this been contributing to market pressure for higher rents that have spread elsewhere? And can we integrate affordable housing into GPLET? And the short answer was yes. A GPLET tool could be used for affordable housing, for you know, multifamily housing. I call it income producing properties, right? So so that's possible. And hundreds of new residential units, as you saw in our storyboard presentation of projects that have come forward, are some indicators of that. But new residential units have been added in the central business district. I think we have about 1,000 under construction now. Not all of those may be GPLET projects, but certainly the new Rendezvous project is one of those. And so we've seen we've seen affordable and we've seen luxury. So I think we've seen a variety on the spectrum. And here, Kevin also mentioned new units are generally more expensive than the older units. The increase in supply of units downtown generally exerts downward pressure on the housing market. But yes, the GPLET can be used to attract more affordable housing. What other questions might be had? I guess at this point, if we've answered most of those that are written, I'm seeing something else come through. From Neil, can you comment on the community benefits agreements? Will they be mandatory? So thanks, Neil. That's a great question. And what I will tell you is, as I mentioned earlier, that we have made some modifications. And again, with leadership from the mayor and Ward 1, Councilmember Lane Santa Cruz, we began to look at our GPLAT application process last year. We began to put some new parameters in place for moving forward as we review those applications. We have included a neighborhood engagement piece that we require. So much like planning and development services requires neighborhood meetings for zoning cases, for example, we're using a very similar process for notifying the neighbors in the radius around the project of their proposal and their application for the incentive. And so that way the community members nearby and the neighborhood associations are aware of what's happening long before it comes on to a council agenda. So that was a very specific request of the mayor and Ward 1 as we began to revise our application process. So with that came the discussion of the community benefits agreements. And as you saw, we have seen in a couple of projects, even before we started revising our process for neighborhood engagement, we saw on 4th Avenue, for example, an example of a community benefits agreement that was put in place in order to have the developer work with the neighborhood to create a win-win situation for that project and to answer the concerns or questions that they may have and to help create a partnership that would be successful for both moving forward. Because as you can imagine, with every project, there are always some nuances and there are always some things that are going to change, and that creates some heartache sometimes. So here's where I know I editorialize. I guess I'm allowed to do that. I'm the economic developer. But what I would say is we are having the neighborhood engagement piece, and we are asking for that conversation to occur. And we're currently working on a new application where we are in the midst of a review of community benefits agreements. So I would say where it is, where it comes up and there are neighborhood associations in the surrounding area of a project, then I think that is something that we are looking at. We are creating a scoring mechanism for our GPLAT application that would speak to that, so that if a project has a community benefits agreement, that it would be weighted higher in its review, and so would be considered more favorably potentially by mayor and council for the full incentive. So that's a long-winded way of saying yes, and it's something that we really encourage developer and neighbors to work together on. Let's see, and then the question is, can the community benefits agreement be retroactive after the GPLAT is approved? So I think it's a lot harder for that to happen, right? Like with anything, we even like our incentives to be, they need to be locked in and in place before a project moves forward, right? Because the idea is that the project needs the incentive in order to move forward. So, we ask that, that to happen. So I think with the same thing, we would want to do that on the front end, because I think it would be very difficult to go retroactive. And Roy, if you have any comment on that, but I think that's my best answer.
Barbara, I'd like to comment on that. I think that you already mentioned it, but it bears repeating that the community benefit agreements are intended to not involve the city, right? We're facilitating those agreements, but they are in effect agreements between the private property owner and the neighborhood association or associations. So I think from that perspective, legally, yes, they could be entered into at any time. But to your point, right, it's a lot more from a negotiating perspective. If I was the neighborhood association, I would want to ensure that I'm negotiating with the developer before they have their project in place.
Perfect. Yes, you're right, because it is, at any point in time, right? A neighborhood association could reach out to a developer or project owner or business owner, whoever they want, and have that conversation about what kind of win-wins they could create for the community. So you're right. That's a great point.
If I may, Barbara, just to tack on to what Kevin just said, the other part to remember is that the way these function is there's a lease that's generated between the developer and the city, and that's a legally binding document and contract. And so in order to have the most appropriate way of letting everybody know what the expectations are in that document, generally that community benefits agreement is going to be hammered out before then.
Yeah. So I know Maura Alexander, she has, her note came in after Josefina's question, and I didn't want to ignore that. She says, crime, blight, and slums keep getting brought up, but just putting a pretty face on an area does not help the residents and houseless who live in these areas. This is a really downstream approach and does not address the issues that you're pointing out. And I think she means the ones that Josefina mentioned with gentrification. And I think what I would suggest is that some of the things that we do know, and I'll just take the public safety example. I mean, we do know that if we impact, it's the broken windows theory. If we clean up, if we repair windows, if we take down graffiti, if we restore a building, if we put a business in where there hasn't been one and it's just cobwebs and other things, boarded up windows. If we change that, it does have a positive impact on its surroundings. And so I would suggest that there is something to the physical aspects of a revitalization approach. And that's what this speaks to, and that's what the state statute is really speaking to when it creates the central business district. So here is some more questions from Ron. How and who enforces a community benefits agreement? Again, it's between the neighborhood and the project owner. And so that's an agreement they each sign. But as Roy mentioned, I think Roy, you mentioned there might be some mention of it, but it is a separate agreement. Neil has said some West Side neighborhoods have not advocated during the latest developments. I'm trying to see where he, okay. Maybe in regards to community benefits agreements with some of the projects coming forward. So Neil, you might say, and then Joe is talking about once a development project and any incentives are approved, there's little leverage to negotiate a community benefits agreement, meaning if the city's okay with giving G-plats before there's a community benefits agreement in practice, you're not getting a CBA, or at least not a good one. Right, and so that's exactly why we changed the neighborhood engagement piece to require that as part of this process. So Corky asks, can you explain why Barrio Anita is being included? It is almost all residential. So Kevin, or do you want to help me with that in terms of the—
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
We touched on it before with the general idea that we're trying to meet the length and width requirements per statute, and it's obviously not going to be possible to do that without including some residential areas. We're certainly aware that there's a lot of sensitivity around that neighborhood in particular, as it's essentially surrounded, on two sides by pretty heavy commercial uses and then the interstate on the other side. There are, though, we think some reasonably developable non-residential properties that are in and around that area. And so in order to pull those in, it was, I think, necessary to pull in some of the residential as well. But I think Barbara stated it very clearly before. It is not and has not ever been the city's intention to use the central business district or the G-plat tool to facilitate the redevelopment of residential neighborhoods.
So Colette's saying, calling about attention to Ron Sparks' question. We did not answer Ron Sparks' question. She asked, are you saying that enforcement might require legal action on the part of the neighborhood to get the agreement enforced? So legal.
Roy, would you mind jumping in on that one? The specific question was about who and how the community benefits agreements are enforced.
Sure, and likely that's correct. It depends, again, on what we alluded to before. If the community benefits agreement is called out in the G-plat, then that might have some language related to enforcement of through the G-plat. But if not, then the CBA is a legal document between the developer and the the area neighborhood, and so that would be legally enforceable in court.
Yeah, and I would add to that, I mean, and this starts to occur in the neighborhood engagement process. When we begin convening those meetings and the developer and the neighbors start to meet, it's our goal that they build a relationship, right? And I think that, you know, that's the beginning of it. And then the community benefits agreement, if that happens, then that gets created and there's a partnership and a win-win. And so, and it's a very public process. So one would think that the development team, you know, would honor that because it's a very public situation. And if things go awry, it's not going to look good for them. So I think that the goal would be that there's a willingness to do what they say they're going to do on both sides, all sides, including our side, that we're all transparent and upfront and we do what we say we're going to do. But again, as with anything, and Roy knows this best, the attorneys know that, yes, there wouldn't be attorneys if there weren't things to enforce or have to go back and litigate. But I think that's the last thing that we're looking for. We want the win-win. And then, all right, so it looks like, so at this point, since there's no more questions on the chat, I'm going to ask if anyone would like to be unmuted. I'm going to stop sharing for right now. I see someone's raised their hand, so I'm going to go to that where I can get to it. Oh, and why isn't it not coming up? There is.
Am I unmuted?
Oh, there you are. Good, good. Please go forward. Yes, and if you would say your name, because I don't see it on the screen, you're on the phone.
My name is John Burr from Armory Park. I'm sorry, I don't have the technological means to do the other stuff. In Armory Park, we're very concerned because you've commandeered about 28% of an HPZ, and we're the only one impacted. And findings of blight in the past have been used to essentially redline districts. I would like to know what exactly the city plans to do to ensure that banks, insurance companies, and other homeowner benefits you can provide and ensure that there won't be run-on effects by the designation of blight for large areas of the city.
Great. So, and I think, you know, we did talk about there are certainly some wonderful neighborhoods that are in our area. Armory Park is one of those in the district. I don't have any experience with how it would have a negative impact on a lending environment or other. I was going to see if Kevin or others had some thoughts. Or Roy, anyone on the team want to take that?
What I can say, Barbara, is that the lending process is very strictly regulated by federal law and state law. Lenders, in terms of redlining, because for any particular purpose, is very much frowned upon in the lending industry. And to be clear, and Kevin and Mike and Barbara can speak to this as well, we've had a rather large CBD for some time now, and we're not aware of those effects happening. The reality is that for the vast majority of the residential areas that are within the CBD, you'll likely see not much of an effect because the focus is in commercial property.
I think that's well said, Roy.
All right. Thank you, John.
Yep.
Are there others that have questions? If you would, I'm going to look here down the list. I think we just had his answer. So others, any other hands raised? I don't see any hands raised, but if you would. Yes, go ahead. Oh, I heard someone.
Maybe me.
Oh, good. Go ahead.
Josefina, I have a couple of questions. On the presentation, I saw and heard a 25. So are you changing from 8 years to 25 years? What was that 25 for?
That was the number of projects that I believe we have had with GPLET applications. Kevin is.
There's one more piece too, Barbara, which is the sort of dual purpose for the government property lease excise tax.
Yes.
And so earlier, Barbara was explaining that one way we can use the GPLET is anywhere in the city, right? Not just inside the CBD, to enter into a lease agreement with a private property owner according to a lease schedule that's defined under state statute. That does not involve an abatement or rebate of property taxes in any way. It's simply a lease arrangement, and those leases can be for up to 25 years, which is different from the GPLET, which is within the central business district, where there can be a tax abatement for up to 8 years.
Yes, and it's my understanding they choose, you don't do both. If you're in the central business district and you choose the 8-year property tax abatement, that's the GPLET lease that you are operating under. But if you're outside the central business district, anywhere else in the city, for example, then under state statute, you can do a 25-year GPLET lease, and there is a set lease amount that's set by statute.
Have you thought, or has it been done, or can it be done, that you go back through the district and ask neighborhoods how it's impacting them and if it needs to be improved?
Thanks. So the absolute purpose of these meetings are to continue that dialogue. But we've certainly, as you saw the list of projects that have come forward and the developments that have occurred, obviously they're very visible and physical. But we do ask for your feedback. And so absolutely, I think the goal is to hear from as many people as possible.
Thank you.
This is Corky Poster. Can you hear me?
Yes. Thanks, Corky.
I want to not start a rumor. I went and looked at the map, and Barrio Anita is not included in the expansion area, so I want to correct that. However, my question equally applies to Barrio Blue Moon, which now is included in the expansion area. And I guess that question has been asked and answered.
Sure. Thanks, Corky. And I think we're looking at the same spot on the map. So like dead center in our proposed map, and you can see the Interstate 10 symbol. The blue line essentially bisects those two triangles there, and you've got the two neighborhoods that you spoke of on either side of the railroad tracks, correct?
No, actually the edge of Dunbar is on the east side of the railroad tracks. Barrio Anita is on the west side, but if you go north of Speedway, that next neighborhood is Barrio Blue Moon, and that is a substantial number of residential properties in there.
Right.
That really, same question, different geography.
Thank you for the clarification. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I didn't want to start the rumor that Barrio Anita was there.
Okay. No, thank you for that. So let's see. Any other questions? If you have any other questions, let me know. All right, I'm still looking, but I don't see any other notes or new hands raised. What I will say is this is, like I said, this is ongoing, your opportunity to share feedback with us. We have emails. Kevin, if you would put an email in the chat room for everyone. You also can reach out to us. You'll find us and our information on the website. We will post this recording and all of our links to documents on connecttucson.com. And so by tomorrow afternoon, we should have most of those things there. And we will have the next community meeting on Saturday. So if you feel like anyone should attend, again, I'm going to now tell you exactly when that is, because I don't want to say wrong. It starts at 11 a.m. We'll be on a Zoom meeting here at 11 a.m. To have this same presentation. So again, if there are others that you want to participate, have them attend and register. Kevin, will we have another email going out with the link for the meeting, just maybe tomorrow? I think we usually do another email blast, so I just thought that might be a good place to put it. So we'll do that. I've seen it also show up on some other newsletters from mayor and council, so I know that it has made a few other email news.
I'll add the link to the Saturday meeting registration in the chat, and then yes, we will send out our Connect Tucson Thursday email, which will have the registration link as well.
So Ken's final comment here was the feedback is not particularly useful if the conditions report, the basis of the action, is not subject to amendment. So the thing about the findings of condition is that's the findings of condition, right? That's not, so that basically that's why we call it findings of fact. I call it findings of fact, findings of conditions, because those are the actual conditions that we noted when we surveyed the area. What that report does is inform the resolution that mayor and council consider on September 9th. So in essence, your feedback is important. In other words, mayor and council still have consideration over the renewal and expansion of the district. As I said in our opening comments, they have the option to renew or not to renew. They can disband, sort of, so to speak, the district. And I hear what you're saying. You also wrote in the chat room, Ken, it's not factual in the case of Armory Park. But again, remember, it's a preponderance of the conditions. It's not every parcel. Not all 4,619 parcels have evidence of blight. So I really want to, and that's the education piece here that's important. It does not mean that every parcel is a blighted or has conditions of slum and blight. It is the preponderance. Similar to your historic district, not all structures are historic or eligible historic, but many of them are contributing, or there's a preponderance of, so it's that kind of thing. And I know it's very legalese, but I hope that helps. Again, thanks for everyone's questions. And I think we've pretty much covered it. Any other closing thoughts from any of our partners or staff team members? All right. Hearing none, I want to thank you. I think the only question I have, Roy, from an attorney's perspective is, do we have, I guess we have, by virtue of registration, we have a sign-in version. So we actually can capture all of those who registered, which I think outnumber even those who attended. So that would act as our sign-in. Is that okay, Roy?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. All right. With that, I'll close our meeting and thank everyone for coming, and spread the information so we can get all the feedback before we move forward. Thank you.